Hey, my name is Colleen. I'm here again with another interview for the Integrated HPS project. I'm really excited today to have Dr. Donata Romizi. She's a professor at the University of Vienna, and she also received her PhD in the philosophy of science from the University of Vienna. And today we're going to spend a lot of time talking about her book, which is titled On the Tale of Scientific Determinism, from Classical Mechanics to the Emergence of Quantum Physics. And I'm really excited to talk to you today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask you a general question first, if that's okay. So,
of course.
Yeah. Kind of what sparked your interest in philosophy, and why did you decide to study the philosophy of science? How did you kind of come to this career path?
Well, I suppose it's a similar case as for many people. I had an amazing teacher in high school, an amazing teacher of history and philosophy, which are very strongly connected in Italy, because the curriculum for philosophy was designed by two philosophers with an Hegelian background. So you really know the ideas only if you can embed them in the history of the development of the spirit, which is not entirely wrong, but a bit partial. And so at the end of the school, I was not sure if I want to study philosophy or history, because I was quite enthusiastic about both of them. But in the end, I decided I will study philosophy. I suppose that this was because, I mean, I had a little more, I had a preference for philosophy, probably because I'm a kind of systematic person. I like to put everything in a systematical order and clarity and so on. And probably this is also the reason why I got interested in philosophy of science at the university. I studied at the University of Bologna, and there the department had quite brilliant people like Maria Carla Galavotti or Niccolò Guicciardini and some others. And for me, it was quite new because in Italy at school philosophy is really very rooted in humanities. It's not so much to do with science. So for me, it was a kind of surprise. Philosophy of science. It was quite new at the university. And then I attended the courses by these very good people. And then I thought, okay, this is something I like.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's cool too. I didn't really realize before I came to college and like started taking philosophy classes that there was a philosophy of science too. So I don't know. That's kind of how I was really surprised that it even existed. So in your philosophy of science work, you obviously written a book on it, and you've done a lot of work on scientific determinism. Kind of what sparked this interest? And for anybody who's watching who might not know what it is, could you just describe it really briefly?
Yes, scientific determinism in general is the idea that, well, you take some system, it could be a physical system, but it will also be the entire world, including us. And the general idea is that in the development of this system, the previous states fully determine the following ones. So like there is no chance or no freedom. It's like a system that develops with this kind of necessity. This is a very general idea, but there are many different forms of scientific determinism. It's called scientific because normally it has a kind of backup in some science, usually physics, but there are also interesting forms of scientific determinism in biology or also in the social sciences.
Awesome. What kind of got you into writing a book on this topic? Is there anything specific, or did you just think it was like a super interesting part of philosophy of science?
Again, please.
Oh, great. Sorry. Why did you decide to write a book on this topic?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't understand.
No, no.
Um, I decided to write about scientific determinism. I mean, the real roots of my interest go back to an interest in quantum physics, philosophy of quantum physics, and indeterminism, and the role that probability plays in quantum physics and indeterminism. So when I came to Vienna to do my PhD, it was quite natural for me to propose a project about the Vienna Circle and the problem of indeterminism in quantum physics. So I started with this project. But then I read and I heard so many times the usual story that quantum physics means that scientific determinism has been, overcome, and I started to think, okay, but what does this really mean? What is the meaning of scientific determinism? And then I looked, I tried to find literature, and I was struck by the fact that there is a huge amount of literature and discussion about quantum physics and indeterminism, but there was really little literature, very few works about what scientific determinism actually is. And the two major works are by Ernst Cassirer and Jan Hacking. And I read them and I was even more puzzled because they said, well, scientific determinism emerged in the second half of the 19th century. And if you look everywhere, even in Wikipedia, you see, well, scientific determinism is the very important formulation is by Laplace. So at the beginning of the 19th century, and I thought, okay, but then why? And a common place is also that scientific determinism is rooted in classical physics, which goes even more, which is even earlier. So I thought, okay, this is kind of strange. Why should the explicit concept of scientific determinism emerge only in the second half of the 19th century if we say that determinism is implied in classical mechanics, which is much earlier, or the best formulation is in Laplace, which is in any case earlier, and above all, there is an even greater puzzle. In the second half of the 19th century, determinism had been already eroded in many respects. So I thought, why should the concept emerge when the content has been already weakened in many respects? And this is something that Hacking and a puzzle that Hacking notices, but he doesn't explain it. So I got interested in this. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool how you found that big gap and were able to kind of fill it with your book. If I could ask,
the book is only a contribution to fill it.
I addressed it. That's awesome though. Could I ask you a few questions about your book specifically now?
Of course.
Okay, awesome. So in your book, you talk about this new measurement system for scientific determinism, sorry. And I was wondering if you could kind of describe that three-dimensional measurement system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I call it measurement system because it admits degrees, but it's not about numbers. So probably it would be better to say classification system. Usually there is a distinction that is always been made between, for example, scientific and epistemic determinism, or the determinism and predictability. There were already these distinctions, but when I started to work historically, I noticed that they were not so helpful, because the variety of the forms of scientific determinism was went beyond this kind of dichotomic distinctions. And the problem was especially that words like ontologic or epistemic, their meaning changes over history. So it was not a good they were not a good yardstick, because if the yardstick is flexible and moves itself, then you cannot measure anything. So I thought we need some kind of more elaborated distinction. And my classification system has like 3 dimensions, which one can imagine like 3 axes, and they determine a space in which each form of, or any form of determinism can be placed in. It's a conceptual space, of course. So the first dimension is the strength, which means the degree of necessity with which the previous states determine the following ones.
Mm-hmm.
This may vary. For example, if you are talking about the determinism implied in differential equations, it's like a mathematical implication, so it's a maximum degree. But there were also forms, for example, of the so-called statistical determinism. So the following states are determined by the previous one with a higher degree of probability, but not with necessity.
Okay.
So there are many different degrees. Then the second dimension is the what I call the depth, and this means the degree of ontological commitment. You can mean scientific determinism as saying that reality in itself develops in a deterministic way, but some forms of determinism are meant, like, for example, in a normative sense, any scientific theory must be deterministic, but we are talking about a theory, not reality itself. Or some others mean scientific determinism in the sense of a heuristic for science. You have to presuppose it in order to find out, and so on. And the last dimension is a breadth. And with this, I mean the object which determinism is ascribed to. So we can talk about some limited object like a system or a theory or laws. We can talk about deterministic model or deterministic law or deterministic theory. And here we have a kind of limited object. Or we can say, we can refer to the entire universe, like Laplace, for example. And we can also say explicitly, including humans, so denial of free will, for example. And so here I distinguish between, for example, between determinism as a worldview and the so-called Weltanschauung. So worldview would be the object is the universe, the physical universe, and the Weltanschauung would be when people say explicitly including human beings, so that there is no free will, for example. And this kind of classification allows also to see that the contrary of determinism is not always indeterminism. For example, an alternative to deterministic models could be also stochastic models. That it must not be necessarily indeterministic model. And this is also, I think, an important thing, because if you look sometimes in dictionaries or companions, And sometimes you find determinism, see indeterminism, or indeterminism, see determinism, as if there would be only these two possibilities, but it's not so. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really cool. I to think about it like that. Um, So my next question about your book is you talk about how in the second half of the 19th century through 1920, there's this big ideological, opposition that kind of arises between determinism and indeterminism. So what did you say, or what would you say are the two or a couple big reasons for this opposition kind of happening?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the 19th century, we have a kind of special setting. I mean, the setting for the discussion about determinism changes. Well, before, determinism was implicit, so it was not discussed as determinism or determinism versus indeterminism, but was implicit and implied in other developments and discussions that took place among few specialists within a discipline or even within a theory. And in the 19th century, the setting is completely different because scientists becomes like public men. They don't just do their research in their field and communicate with each other, but there is a kind of public space for them in which they speak. And at the same time, the question of determinism, well, scientific determinism begins to be applied in other realms than physics. So, for example, in physiology or in the social sciences. So it's begins to refer also to our world, to the human world, and to actions, and so and to history, for example. So it's with respect to the content, its breadth becomes wider because it concerns questions that are not only specialistic questions within a discipline. And the actors, so to say, the scientists are not talking just to each other, but they are acting in the public space, and they really intend also to say their words in political debates or about religious issues or about nationalist issues. And so this question of scientific determinism sometimes is a kind of placeholder for other positions. So when people like, I know, Helmholtz, for example, or Ostwald support scientific determinism in public, is they want to say something like we want to support science in society, and the church should be less powerful in education, and the German school is better than the French one. So this kind of other issues. So, and I think that this is one main reason why the concept of the explicit concept, the label, so to say, of scientific determinism emerge in at that time, emerges.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that answer. Um, were there any unique challenges that kind of came up when you're writing a book as opposed to when you're writing a paper? Anything like really different about both of them?
So when I started to work on the issue, I was not really aware that I'm writing a book. I was just writing my PhD. And then it was awarded 3 prizes, and the last one was by a publisher who also decided to publish the book as a book. So, but at the beginning, I was not really thinking, oh, I'm writing a book. But still, it was a very, very challenging work because I had this very big scope. I decided, for reasons that I explained in the book, that I want to consider the time, this long time span between Newtonian physics and the beginning of the 20th century, so the emerging of quantum physics. And this is quite a long time. And I wanted to also consider the cultural context, historical context, and reconstruct also political things. So it was really a huge project, and nobody told me, "Are you crazy? Stop it!" So I worked many years, and of course you really need endurance in the sense that you have, of course, times in which you think, okay, I give up because it's not possible. It's taking so much time. Why am I doing this? And the very important thing is that at the beginning, you have a kind of clear set of questions. Mm-hmm. So because in the course of the years, of course, you have you find so a huge amount of research materials, and then you are there are all the tempting questions distracting you, or you have to always to know what to know what your focus is and what you want to find out, and to have a structure. This is why also the reason why I started with this kind of classification system. So you have to have a kind of order in which things are can be put in. Otherwise you lose yourself in this ocean of of literature and materials. And well, in comparison to writing a paper, of course, the period in which you have to write without how you say, without a response, or without this satisfaction, this kind of satisfaction that you have when you're finished.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. It must be really hard. Yeah, definitely the endurance to finish a book seems something like you have to have. I can't, yeah, that's such a long time to be working on one thing. That's awesome. That's really awesome. I want to be really aware of your time. So is it okay if I ask you one more question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Cool. I just don't want to like I know everybody's very busy right now. This is just like kind of a more fun question, but if you could tell me kind of what's your favorite part of being a philosopher? Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. So I think there is a kind of individual component and a social component. I would say the individual component is that it really fits well to my character. I am a kind of contemplative person who, as I said, wants to put everything in a kind of order, and I'm very systematical thinker, and I like forms. I really like abstract forms. So this is then philosophy is of course a pleasure for me in this respect. But I think that the even more important is a kind of social component, and this is present, especially present when I'm teaching, and this is a kind of I like very much to show other people things that are puzzling, so denaturalize things. Showing that some things are not self-evident, and I like this moment of puzzlement, of wonder, of okay, when and I like it. I like it when I experience it, and but I like it even more when I'm teaching, and when I say, okay, people are in some sense awakened, so they were in a kind of sleep, and they suddenly noticed, oh, okay, this is not really as I thought it was, and so and yeah, and this is, I think, a reason why I'm more and more active in education. I am also shifting a bit the focus of my work away from philosophy of science and in the direction of doing more and more stuff in education, because I also think for political reasons that philosophy could be very, very, very important in education to, should reach more people than the people that research usually reaches. And it would be so important also in schools, and if a broader public could develop a kind of habit, a critical habit in dealing with their own beliefs, a habit to think, okay, what are my beliefs? Are they coherent? Where is the base of my belief? Why do I believe this? What are my reasons? Because I think that in the last years we have seen that democracy without education, without this capacity of critical thinking, it doesn't work well. So I think that we have a great responsibility here. And I don't know how it is in the US, but here in Europe, concerning philosophy and education, there is a very strong focus on ethics. So when it comes to philosophy, the really important part of philosophy in education is practical philosophy and ethics. And I think that it is not, it is really underestimated the importance of theoretical philosophy, precisely in this sense that that people learn to be clear about what they believe and what the basis for their beliefs is, and to be critical. We live in a time at which a kind of brainwashing is so easy, you know. And I see all the time people being extremely brainwashed from the media, for example, and these are all very, very big dangers for democracy. So this is also what I not only enjoy, but I also feel responsible for as a philosopher.
That's great. That's awesome that you have that perspective to be really socially engaged with your philosophy in that way. Because I think in the US too, it's like people, I wish there were more people who kind of thought through their beliefs and really were able to look at where they come from and do they make sense. I think that would do a lot of good to us in the world, everybody. Yeah, I agree with you on that. All right, that's my last question for you.